Clemson and Dabo Swinney. Wanted to wrap the show up with this tonight. You have asked for like 2 or 3 shows in a row. When are you going to talk about Clemson? Because there's this funny slice of our audience that thinks I'm a Clemson homer. There is a big slice of the Clemson fan base that thinks we're Clemson haters. And then there's reality, and it's just that we watch Clemson like we do every other program. Clemson and Dabo Swinney right now. A lot of churn going on around the program. I was recalling the other day, I was telling the story to one of our staffers about one of the most contentious periods in the history of this show. It was well before we came to 24/7. It was when I was down in Columbus, Georgia, and we were doing the show independently. It was the 2018 National Championship game. It was the one in Santa Clara. What a disaster. And it was also a disaster for Alabama because Clemson just body-bagged Alabama. I think it was 44-16, the final. Just not even competitive. In the end, it wasn't competitive. And coming off that, I fly back home. I was at the game. I fly back home, and I do the next show, and I was non-committal on going as far as a lot of the national types had, which is to say that Clemson had ascended to being the top program in the country, and Dabo Swinney had ascended to being the top head coach in the country. It was very hard because I couldn't honestly state my opinion in the immediate aftermath of a team winning a title without it sounding like I was a hater. Because you're supposed to just be adorning them with praise, which I was for the win, and that was their second in 3 years, and both of the wins were over Alabama. It was nothing about that. But the suggestion I kept making was there is an illusion that a lot of people were under. There were some Clemson fans under it, some of the national media, some of the agnostic observers were under the same illusion, and that was Clemson has gotten to this altitude, there'll be no turbulence, they're just going to cruise. And there were some people who would suggest to you because they go about things differently there, because their process is different, and I'll grant you it is. That's a testament to them. It's a credit to them. But there were some under the illusion that because they've built it different, because their principles may be a little bit different, they are immune to what I call the consequences of success. And I never bought that. And you should never have bought that because they weren't. I will say this, they do it different there. They do have a different culture. It's a credit to Dabo Swinney that it's taken this long for the consequences of success to really jump up and bite him. They haven't been losing staffers. They haven't been losing decommitments. But now they are. And it's all happening really fast. So Clemson now, without Brent Venables, the defensive coordinator, without Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator, without the athletic director, they've had multiple decommitments. They've got guys hitting the transfer portal. And so it leads you to ask, what's happening at Clemson? Well, churn is what's happening at Clemson. Life is what's happening at Clemson. I know you may look at it and see this big giant red flag. Yeah, it's a red flag because they haven't gone through it before. It doesn't automatically mean it's a death sentence for the program, but it is an inflection point for Dabo Swinney and his tenure there. Because I think back to like Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, when that old ghost pirate, he says, you best start believing in ghost stories. Hold on, let me put my patch on. You're in one. Well, you best start believing in the consequences of success because you're in them. This is it. This is what real life has been like for Nick Saban for the past decade to decade and a half at Alabama. They lose coordinators every year. They got decommitments happen. They got kids entering the portal, and they just keep on ticking. That's what you have to be the greatest of all time. It's not getting up. It's actually being able to cruise. And then if you need to stick the landing, being able to stick the landing. Getting there is not nearly the hardest part. Oh, it's hard. Most people can't even get there. But staying at the mountaintop with all the consequences, all the thin air up there that you never have to worry about when you're at base camp, that's the hard part. So now we find out about Dabo Swinney. This is not me doubting him. It is me questioning how he'll handle this because you've got to make hires now. And I think it is a huge inflection point. I think it's going to be a very, very critical couple of decisions that Dabo has to make here. And I can tell you, if I know him anywhere close to like I think I do from afar, he's got to be so conflicted because he does have options. It's Clemson. You could go get a lot of guys who want to coach at Clemson. It's a great opportunity. What he, in his mind, has to reason is, does he want to go internal and promote from within, or does he think it's time for new blood? Because you could look internally. You could look at Brandon Streeter, who's currently coaching quarterbacks for him. You could just elevate him to offensive coordinator. Some people think that's what he's going to do. You could look at Wes Goodwin, and he's an off-field analyst for you. You could promote him if you wanted to defensive coordinator. Some people think that's the direction he'll go. But let me tell you what else people think, and I would agree with this. The program's been stale. It is not a program that feels like it's got a lot of fresh water flowing into it. You got to be careful. You got to be careful. Nick Saban's been very good to guard against this. Stagnation is not a good thing for any kind of program, any kind of organization. You need new ideas. You don't need new principles. You don't need new values. Those are mainstays. But new ideas, new approaches, tinkering with doing it this way, or understanding that there's evolution happening out there and we got to stay one step ahead of it or we'll be behind it. How do you weigh that? You got the Clemson way of doing things, sure. You've built your organization so that you can promote from within. But then over on the other side, you're asking yourself, but if we do have that stagnation problem, if we are a little stale, if we're in a bubble here in our own right, and there's a lot going on out there that we're just not aware of, and there's some programs that are getting an edge on us that we're not aware of, well, the only way really maybe to solve that is for me to bring some new blood in here. But there's risk with that too. You don't know if any of these guys are going to work out, but there's risk with that too. You've already got some of your signing class. All the IMG kids, 3 big-time defensive players have decommitted. If you go another direction, and maybe Elliott or Brent Venables come and they go after Streeter, or they go after Goodwin, do you lose some more of your recruiting class? How are you going to weigh that? You also got this little tidbit to keep in mind. Dabo, to this point, has not leveraged the transfer portal. I think he's got to leverage the transfer portal. This is all happening over the span of a few months. Now, it's been building up, and we've led up to this, but now you've got all these things that once people bragged about Dabo not having to worry about, they're not trickling. It's a flood. Someone cracked the dam, and there's a flood, and now you got to fill all those roles, and you got to deal with this issue and that issue, and then you're going to have to maybe make some decisions that you've never been put in a position to have to make before. That's what a leader has to do. It's really easy. I'm not questioning Dabo Swinney's resolve or his grit. He was around when it wasn't so good. And Dabo Swinney, he was a risk. Clemson took a big risk on him. He knows all about that. I don't doubt that he knows about that. I do wonder, when it comes to those consequences of success, about how he's going to deal with it the same way I wonder about anyone else, because there is no training manual for this. You can listen to every clinic speaker. You can get all the phone calls and text messages with people who've been there and done that, and they can give you all the advice in the world. They don't know the organization like you do. They don't know your heart and your mind like you do. You got to make the decisions, because you are the leader of Clemson football. They're not. You can't do it exactly like Saban did it or exactly like Urban did it when he was a college football head coach, I should specify. This is, like I said, along with the Texas situation, one of the most intriguing college football storylines, because this is not just happening in a vacuum, guys. We've also got a new coach in town in Coral Gables. So they're certainly not going to sit there and just fall in line where they're supposed to. Florida State's not going to fall in line where they're supposed to. Pitt and Wake Forest just play for the ACC title, not Clemson. So the ACC was never just going to sit still and let Clemson beat on it for a decade and a half. So now we got some evolution happening. We got some churn happening. We got some changes happening. One of the biggest stories to pay attention to.